You've probably done this in the most ordinary moment possible. You're in the kitchen, or the car, or standing in front of an open closet, and without planning to, you say something out loud. Maybe it's, "No, that's not what I meant." Maybe it's, "Okay, keys, wallet, charger." Maybe it's an entire rehearsal for a conversation that hasn't happened yet. And the second you hear yourself, something in you flinches. You look around, you lower your voice. For half a second, it feels like you've been caught doing something you weren't supposed to do, which is strange because talking to yourself is one of the most common things people do, and yet it gets treated like a tiny social crime. Fine in children, fine in movies when a genius is solving a problem, but in adults, especially if someone overhears it, it suddenly gets framed as odd, unstable, slightly embarrassing. As if speaking your thoughts out loud means something is wrong with you. It usually means the opposite. What looks strange from the outside is often the sound of a mind trying to organize itself in real time. The brain does not always process thought best in silence. Sometimes a thought stays vague until it becomes audible. The moment you say something out loud, even quietly, it stops being a blur and becomes something you can work with. Psychologists have known for a long time that people often do tasks better when they guide themselves with language, not because talking is magical, but because language creates structure. It slows the mind just enough to let attention catch up. A sentence can do what a swarm of thoughts cannot. Start with this. No, calm down. One thing at a time. These aren't random noises. They're instructions. Anchors. But people do not only talk to themselves when they are trying to remember groceries or find their phone, they do it when they are trying to manage themselves. Some people talk to themselves when they're overwhelmed because hearing their own voice cuts through the chaos better than silent thought can. Some do it when they're anxious, because anxiety makes thought race ahead in fragments, and speech forces those fragments into a line. Some do it while making decisions because a choice can feel unreal until it's spoken. And some do it after difficult interactions, replaying a conversation in the shower or the parked car, not because they're dramatic, but because their mind is still trying to process what happened. You see this a lot in people who live intensely in their own heads. Overthinkers. Highly imaginative people. People who rehearse future conversations before they happen, then replay them afterward with different endings. People whose inner world moves quickly and doesn't always arrive in neat paragraphs. For them, talking out loud is not a performance. It's translation. It's the difference between drowning in thought and finally being able to stand in it. And there's something else about speaking to yourself that matters more than people realize. Sometimes you believe yourself more when you can hear yourself. Silence can keep a thought slippery. You can think, "It's probably fine," and not feel it, but say out loud, "No, listen, you're panicking, but you handled this before," and suddenly the sentence lands differently. It feels less like a passing thought and more like something solid enough to lean on. Because talking to yourself is not always about solving a problem. Sometimes it is about becoming a steady presence inside your own experience. It is the calmer voice stepping in when the louder one starts spiraling. The part that says, "Okay, we're not doing this right now," or "Let's try that again," or "In some very quiet moments, you're going to be okay." And yes, that can feel emotional, even a little vulnerable to admit, but it's deeply human. Before we ever learned how to manage ourselves, we were regulated by other people's voices. Someone soothed us. Someone guided us. Someone helped turn confusion into something bearable. Over time, some of that voice becomes internal, and sometimes, especially under stress, it becomes external again for a moment. Not because you're losing control, but because your nervous system is reaching for one of the oldest tools it has: language shaped like care. That's why self-talk often shows up around fear, fatigue, loneliness, or pressure. If nobody else is in the room, many people instinctively become that support for themselves. They coach themselves through parking anxiety. They narrate the next step after bad news. They whisper themselves through grief in a bathroom mirror. They say, "Come on, you can do this," to a version of themselves that feels 1 inch away from shutting down. That is not madness. That is adaptation. And yet the shame around it is real. Most people don't feel ashamed while they're doing it. They feel ashamed when they're noticed. The embarrassment comes from being seen mid-process, before the thought has been polished into something socially acceptable. We are taught to present finished emotion, not the scaffolding. So when someone catches you talking to yourself, it can feel like they accidentally walked in on your mind before it got dressed. That's why the reaction is so immediate. You stop. You smile awkwardly. You make a joke. You pretend you were talking to the dog, the mirror, the universe, anyone but yourself. Because visible inner life makes people uncomfortable. We don't mind people having emotions. We mind seeing the machinery. But a lot of psychologically healthy behavior looks strange when detached from its purpose. Crying can look irrational if you ignore grief. Rest can look lazy if you ignore exhaustion. And talking to yourself can look unstable if you ignore the fact that it is often a tool for focus, regulation, rehearsal, memory, and emotional survival. Sometimes it is even more than that. It is companionship, not because someone is inventing another person in the room, but because language can reduce the loneliness of unprocessed experience. Sometimes saying a thing out loud makes you feel less abandoned inside it. A fear named aloud becomes less foggy. A hard truth spoken into an empty room becomes more bearable. Maybe that's why some people do it more than others, not because they are more broken, but because they feel more, think more, imagine more, carry more, or simply need more structure between thought and emotion. Some minds are built in a way that makes speech clarifying. Some need sound to create order. Some need a voice to interrupt the spiral, because talking to yourself is, in many cases, what self-trust sounds like before it becomes confidence. It is what self-parenting sounds like before it becomes calm. It is what emotional processing sounds like before it becomes understanding. It is messy sometimes, repetitive sometimes, even funny sometimes, but it is rarely meaningless. So if you do this, if you narrate while you work, if you rehearse in the car, if you mutter instructions under your breath, if you've ever stood in front of a mirror and spoken to yourself more gently than anyone else did that day, there is nothing inherently wrong with you. You are not unraveling. You are not failing some unwritten test of normality. You are using language to stay connected to your own mind. And in a world that asks people to silently carry more than they were meant to, that might be one of the most human things you can do. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. There's more to explore, and I think you'll connect with what comes next.